The 2025 midterm elections created a lot of surprises. On one hand, the administration bets heavily underperformed. Contrary to a lot of pre-election surveys, they barely managed to win half of the 12 seats up for grabs in the all-important senatorial race. In the meantime, the other side of this equation, the Duterte camp, was able to almost top the race, with Senator Bongo coming number 1 and Senator Bato at a close number 3. Not to mention some of the other Duterte-aligned candidates like Amy Marcos, Camille Villar, and Mark Oleta also featuring among the 12 victors. But the other big surprise was the emergence, or re-emergence rather, of the liberal progressive forces. Former Senator Bam Aquino defied almost all pre-election surveys by ending up in number 2. He won more than 20 million votes, way higher than his last electoral performance in 2019. Meanwhile, former Senator Kiko Pangilinan was among the top 5 candidates in the final tally, yet another defiant performance contrary to pre-election surveys. But do the surprising election results mean that surveys are no longer valid? Or do they only show that voters at the end of the day are not being mind-conditioned by surveys? How accurate were the major survey agencies in capturing the sentiments of the voters? And what about surveys in the context of democracy? Are surveys there to guide politicians and policymakers? Or are surveys there to condition the mind of voters? Are surveys there to enhance policymaking and governance? Or are surveys being weaponized nowadays to push for partisan narratives? Moreover, what is the true landscape? Was this a victory really for the Duterte side? Or was this really a mixed picture, meaning more uncertainty in the Philippine political landscape? And speaking of uncertainty, the decision of the 90th Congress leadership in the Senate to basically defer the trial of Sara Duterte, does that mean that the Philippines should prepare for a Duterte comeback? Or does it mean that the Philippines is entering a political twilight zone? In order to better understand the emerging political landscape in the Philippines and the indeterminacy and contingencies that shape elections nowadays, we have 2 special guests. Thank you very much, Prof. Ranjit and Dean Ed, for joining us for today. Marami tayong pag-usapan. Of course, impeachment is a hot issue in this month as of this speaking. And gusto rin natin pag-usapan, basically, the road to 2028 or Project 2028 and different scenarios. But before going there, since Prof. Ranjit, you represent one of the major think tanks, survey agencies rather, in the country. One of the narratives that came out, is that the surveys got this so wrong, supposedly, or that the surveys did not get it right enough for some of the candidates to be able to make the case to their donors, for instance. Ang hirap daw mag-raise ng support, ng funds, kasi daw kulelat sa surveys, yung pala, competitive pala sila. I mean, some would even have made an argument that some people probably would have even run for Senate instead of other offices, or some other candidates perhaps would have been much more involved in some of the major groups had they known that they would be so competitive. What is your read of the skepticism, or I would say renewed skepticism towards surveys after these elections?
I think it's fair that people are skeptical of surveys, but it has to be clarified to most individuals, to our kababayans, no, that what surveys are and what surveys are not. Now, a survey is not a prediction. So most of our kababayans think of it and associate it with a prediction. And so when you look at the survey of OCTA, which our last survey was April 20 to 24, when you look at that survey, we got everyone's name. That's everybody that won was in that survey. There are all 12 names, all 12 winners were in the OCTA survey of April 20 to 24. But
so the overperformance was just in the ranking, or underperformance?
There was just a ranking problem because at that time, it was nearly a month before the elections, and so many things happened, no? In terms of dynamics on the ground, the social media campaign, and we also cannot take for granted the fact that there's agency, voter agency, that voters came out. This is a midterm election where you had almost the same percentage as a presidential election. And it's safe to hypothesize that a lot of young people came out also, no? Because there were a lot of young voters also. And you also look at the data we had before the election, where you had voting behavior to some extent discussed in the fill-out rate. The fill-out rate is useful for survey companies because it shows you how voters are looking at the election. And the fill-out rate was what? Between 5 to 8 names. Now, yes, it's the same apparently from 2022. So maybe that may not be for some an explanation. But what you can use is the fact that when you look at the outcome and the fill-up rate, so voters were voting strategically. In many places around the country, voters were voting just 6, 8 names. When you look at the PDP Laban vote in regions 9, 10, 11, 12, it's almost straight with very few additional names added. So voters came out, especially for BAM and Kiko, no? Because the surveys, to some extent, except for OCTA possibly, surveys were not saying they were going to win. Yeah, but in our survey, we knew that BAM was already in. We also knew that Kiko was very competitive. What pushed them forward, again, to a great extent, may have been voters who studied the surveys, looked at the trends, and decided on election day, and we have data to prove that about 20% of our voters, around 18 to 20%, just decide on the day of the elections. Now, put that together, strategic voting, on the day of elections, the dynamics of local and national politics, negotiation, the Iglesia vote, and the fact that, at some level, a segment of our own population began to discern between character, competence, clarity of a platform or program, and take out the noise, from the substance, yeah. So the spin from the substance, and voted, So at some level, it's really hard to explain such a dynamic phenomena just on surveys. Last point: surveys are reliable. They continue to be reliable. I think the performance of OCTA, last survey almost a month before, shows that if we had the survey in May, we probably would have even gotten the rankings correctly. Yeah. But we didn't have the funds to do that. Number two, I think the reflection is we should have an exit poll like we have in the US, so we can also understand how voters behave. Although OCTA is going to have its own survey.
We had exit polls here up to 2016.
Yeah, I know,
TV5,
but we didn't have one this time out.
Yeah.
And this was quite surprising because at some level, while we got all the names correct, the rankings were off. Some people we thought for 2 or 3 surveys, this is one of the most surveyed, studied elections of our time.
Sure.
So many companies. And the pattern was also quite clear for many of the survey companies. 8 Alianza, 2 PDP, and 2 independents.
Yeah.
But what came out was very, very different, in some extent.
We'll discuss that, Prof. Ranjit, what are the factors that may have contributed to the underperformance of the admin or overperformance of some of the alternative candidates. But this is still, we're still trying to wrap our head around at least this discourse about the gap between surveys or perceived gaps between the surveys and what came out. Okay, Dean, what is your reading from the outside? Meaning not being part of any major survey agency per se. As a social scientist, what is your read of this? At least the discourse about these discrepancies or this discourse about etong surveys na to, mind conditioning. Was that like a protest also against surveys?
Yeah.
Was it about younger vote? Again, we don't have exit polls, so we're doing educated guess here, but we know that in this election, majority of voters were millennials and Gen Z, and this was the highest turnout in any midterms in recent memory, by far. So lots of youth turned out, and lots of youth said, we're going to vote the way we think things should go.
Well, I think it emanates from a wrong assumption of the use of surveys. Many of our friends in media look at it as something of having a predictive value. But as Prof. Ranjit said, and all the other survey firms have said, they're snapshots of a reality at a certain period in time. And so you have to take it for what they are. If you look at it as having primarily predictive value, then that is where the problem lies. Now, I think what contributed to the shock, if you will, of the results was really certain names that did not fall within the sort of like first 1 to 6.
Yeah.
Right.
And those who were faring relatively well and eventually did not make it. But as Ranjit,
So you're talking about basically, aside from Bongo and Erwin, all the top 6 were surprises. Bam,
truly.
Kiko, Marcoleta, right?
Those are the
Well,
surprises.
Bato also overperformed, right? He
Yeah.
was not top 3 or top 4 in a lot of
Yeah.
surveys I've seen,
But it's not really a major shock in the sense that somebody who was completely out of the survey suddenly cropped up and figured prominently in the survey. So it was really just a matter of rankings. And what's going to be alternative? We're going to get rid of surveys altogether.
Google
That's it.
Trends.
Yeah, I
Oh.
mean, and I think as you mentioned, and this is also what I've been saying all along, it would have been different if we conducted exit polls.
Yes,
Now, the
exactly.
exit polls, if they yielded results that were comparatively different from the actual results, then we would have a problem in the design itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Another interesting, surprising element from these elections, which perhaps goes back to perhaps there was a protest vote, is many of the big name celebrities not only did not make it, they really underperformed. Whether it's Bong Revilla, Manny Pacquiao. I mean, I had people from abroad saying, was it? Because Pacquiao is really the global Filipino icon. Like, what didn't he run? What happened there? And Willie Revilla, for
Yes,
instance,
yes.
I mean, Heidi Mendoza with barely any resources got more votes than Willie Revilla, which probably is a reflection of her strength rather. But nevertheless, many big name celebrities, with the probably exception of Lito Lapid, who didn't rank very high also, did not make it. What is your read of that?
I think that's
Are we maturing? Or maybe not? Or maybe are we changing in terms of our preferences?
It's too hopeful to say that the electorate suddenly changed overnight now. But but a segment of the electorate, I get a sense of this when I talk to my classes, and I
Right.
did informal FGD. Three things I found out. One, they didn't fill out the ballot exactly how the surveys. So, but it's worse. They only put out three names, wrote down three names: Bam, Kiko, and Heidi,
yeah.
or some permutation of some left-leaning candidate.
This is UP, right?
This
So,
is UP, of
no
course.
surprise, no
It's
sur-
not representative.
no surprise.
But it shows you, number two, a lot of them saw surveys as information, and a lot of them didn't like the idea that the pre-election surveys were showing entertainers were going to dominate. So at some level, this may have been for a segment of our voters a protest, against certain types of, But then again, when you look at while it's hopeful, when you look at the elections, it's really more continuity rather than change. You see dynasties, you see politics not being disciplined by platform, program, or ideas. You see personalities and popularity is still an important ingredient to winning. Yeah, so there are lots of continuities. There are also changes, and that I was going to amplify what Prof was trying to say.
Right.
You look at the issue of Marcoleta. You can disagree with his politics, but the fact that he broke in as a product also of activism on the Duterte side, the activism of the mobilization of the vote of the Iglesia, which by the way didn't just help Marcoleta, it had impact on a couple of other candidates. You look at Bam Aquino, that's I think the biggest story, Bam and Kiko. I had intimate interactions with people from their campaign, and even they were surprised by the outcome.
Kala nga ni Kiko, fake news yung number 5 siya.
Yeah. But even they asked us, in March, we were already saying, I was there in the interview we had in another channel.
Of course,
Na we were already saying, that Bam and Kiko were in, that there was some movement. People were making strategic choices. I don't want to be with that administration. I also don't want to vote for Duterte. This was the safe. But the independence we're talking about. And a lot of our own voters are really independents, 30-35% of the vote are really categorizing themselves as not part of the traditional opposition, not part of the Duterte camp or the administration. So this is, a wellspring, of voters, of a source, of hope, for the electorate. Because again, once they're properly informed, there's lots of voter education, di ba?
And motivated,
and motivation to go out, which is what happened,
Motivation,
I think that could have some positive effect as far as democratic discourse is concerned, as far as elections and contestation and representation is concerned. So that movement that's emerging, that counteracts all these trends, that's trying to counteract all of these traditional images of Philippine politics, has to be harnessed, has to be nurtured. Of course, it's going to look for a leader. We're hoping that, the progressives will come in. Last point, you look at the numbers of Heidi Mendoza. She got more votes than Willie Revilla in the end.
Says everything.
You look at our brothers, our friends from the left, who ran. We didn't expect them to get those numbers. So a
6 million, 7 million. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what are we saying here? Voters came out to vote, and they voted for some of the segment, they didn't vote in the traditional way. They didn't just use popularity. They didn't just use spin. They looked at substance, competence, character, clarity of vision to some extent, and voted for progressive candidates. So is that good? I think it's good.
Dean, one of the other interesting aspects of these elections was also the performance in Cebu. We saw the governor, like out of nowhere, PDP Laban. We saw in Baguio, a city I'm familiar with, Mayor Magalong. Many people were wondering how can he, because the other side was supported by the administration. In terms of funding, there was an issue that, the incumbent was actually the underdog. He won at the end of the day. Isko Moreno, he was on the other side of this equation, he won. And of course, Davao of all, like Digong from Hague won, 80-90% of the vote. What is your read of that? Not to mention in Makati, Nancy Binay prevailed against the basically the incumbent's team, right? What is your read of that? Because these are major cities we're talking, Makati, Davao, Baguio, or at least Cebu, Manila. Did we see also enough of contingency or big surprises there, or these are more like flash in the pan?
Well, I think, if there's one realization we can have in this election is that there's no single theoretical explanation for everything. On the one hand, you have, as Professor Ranjit mentioned, you have some wellspring of perhaps hope or inspiration for those who were considered part of the youth vote. And yet, you still have many traditional names, dynastic names even, who still landed on top. Now, it gets a little even more trickier at the national, at the local level. No, you have a combination of both candidates that sort of like symbolized good governance. There were also those who were really out of nowhere, pulled out big surprise, and a good explanation would be that the people who voted for her, I'm talking about
Cebu governor.
Governor Pambare Cuatro, may not really be voting for her, but perhaps against the incumbent. So that's also possible. So it's really a lot of nuanced explanations at the local level.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, interesting and big surprises.
Most certainly. Although, I would agree that there were votes for continuity in some areas, but there were also some surprises.
Of course, all of that tails perfectly with what I want to ask next, which is, a lot of names you mentioned were part of Alianza, or didn't make it, were part of Alianza, right? Whether it's the losing mayor in the Baguio race, in the Manila race, whether it's some of the celebrities we mentioned a while ago, Manny Pacquiao, Bong Revilla, these were Alianza folks or backed by the administration, and they didn't make it. Why do you think there was such an underperformance by the administration? What was the leading we can have a grocery list of things that went wrong for them, but do you think complacency was fundamentally an issue, or that they were really sandwiched between two different major critics, right? Because earlier this year, the critic of the liberal progressive faction was yung budget daw, yung PhilHealth, yung ayuda, worst budget ever, most corrupt budget ever. That resonated with a lot of people. In fact, was weaponized even by the Dutertes, right? Amid all the investigation of the Vice President, which we'll discuss later on once we go to the impeachment issue in the Senate. And then, of course, you had the ICC issue, and my read was there was no follow-through, right? I think the explanation that came out from the administration was definitely not convincing enough. Because I talked to a lot of people in The Hague, here in Manila, before I flew out, I would meet people, sir, ba't nila ginawa yan kay Digong? Kawawa naman, diba? And then when people saw the president mumbling through, even saying his name, he came up as a very sympathetic figure. And there was no corresponding effort to make people realize who are the true victims of these alleged crimes that the ICC is trying to investigate and hold people accountable for. Why such an underperformance? I don't even know how to count it. Did they win 5 or 6? Like Camille Villar, right? Like even that, not probably even half of the seats. That's quite an underperformance.
The projection was 8. They won 6. It's not, here's the thing.
And Aimee defected.
And Aimee got the best of both worlds. She generated the solid North vote, which, by the way, was the reason why she won.
Which is another local government dynamic. Exactly.
But the fact is, the Marcoses get their votes really from the North. And that was proven again by Aimee. She got very nominal support from the South, Okay, despite the fact that she reached out and all of that. Now, it's hard to answer your question, but here's my take. One, the campaign messed up. They lost momentum, largely because of the message. And you're right. They were not able to take advantage of, the messaging that was already there when the Lawag speech was laid out. the us
In February
versus why are we
15, yeah.
different from them, di ba? That was not developed. And now we're hearing from the discussion about the Toby Chanko issue, no?
Yeah.
That apparently the campaign wasn't as organized as we thought it would be. No? They did not take advantage of the fact that 100 congressmen didn't even have opponents and could have been, harnessed to as a part of that broad machinery.
Surrogate for that
So,
messaging, yeah.
Number one, the alliance's machinery failed in the end, lost momentum, and the machinery itself did not come out. You see that in the vote for Abi Binay, in the terms of Bong Revilla. Number two, there's case to case. In the case of Bong Revilla, for example, he's filing a case, or thinking of filing a case. The issue was, there was really, in an age of social media, a lot of black propaganda towards the last month of the campaign. That disinformation. Because at the end of it, is really the aspiration of candidates. Above you and below you. So, maraming black ops, even within
within camps. Yeah. Cannibalism ang tawag ko dyan. Electoral cannibalism.
Number three, is really, you can't understand this vote without at least appreciating, although it's nominal, the impact of the Iglesia vote. Lalo na for BAM, lalo na for Ivy Marcos. They just came out, and we're hearing now that it wasn't just a simple, the flock will vote. They did some negotiation.
With
in short, they did the work of what a party ought to do at the ground level. Fourth is, of course, the messaging. You have to understand, both sides were bereft. I mean, the dominant sides, Duterte and Marcos, were bereft of, engaging messaging. And that messaging of BAM and Kiko may have resonated, that they're the alternative, they're the progressives, and may have inspired some of the independents to move forward. Number five, I think the core issue in this election, and this OCTA came out with a survey in April pala, first week of April, basically saying there are clusters of issues that voters saw as important in deciding who they want to vote for. Number one, it's the economy. I would say, Bill Clinton, it's the economy's stupid. It was the economy, and that had, basically when you do a summary of this midterm, it's really a rejection of the administration to some extent.
Is the inflation important?
Inflation, the fact that, wages are still stagnant to a great extent. We're only talking about, can you imagine, we're talking about the 200 peso minimum wage. This should have been done before the election.
Yeah, it makes you scratch your head. Like, so many low-hanging fruits. Even the 20 pesos kada kilo in Visayas region, that could have been done en masse across the country. Because people said, bakit Visayas lang? So it actually didn't come off well in some other areas.
In short, it was really the mismanagement of
campaign.
The campaign itself. There was no message. They lost momentum. They had very good candidates. Not very good, but very popular. Not very good, but very popular candidates. And all the survey companies were showing that these were winnable candidates. But then again, they lost the momentum. And I want to emphasize, it maybe wasn't the budget, it was really the economy.
Yeah.
And then a second cluster of issues focus on security and peace and order. You won't believe, the war against drugs came out of our surveys. People were angry that crime had, in their perception,
which is likely disinformation also.
Yeah, it's possible. Because crime index has gone down, no? But that was what was coming out. And we weren't the only ones saying it. So that was seen at the national level. It was seen also at the local level. And which is why so many of the campaigns at the local, Manila, for example, recalibrated their campaign to focus on dealing with crime. Because this is what people are saying. This is an issue. Now, we're coming out with a survey tomorrow on urgent national and local concerns, no? Urgent.
This is as of early June.
This is for first quarter. We're just releasing it today, tomorrow.
In June, yeah.
And nearly 60% of people are saying the most urgent concern that government needs to find resolution for, or two, is really inflation. Number two, it used to be jobs. Now number two is really affordable food.
Number three is
No, but it's moved forward. Now it's really access to affordable food.
Food inflation.
So food inflation, it's not just inflation, but the core of that inflation is food inflation.
Yeah.
And to a great extent, that explains why there was a pushback against the administration, why a lot of people decided to vote for other candidates, progressives, the Heidi Mendozas, even the PDP, or, of course, the big story, BAM and Kiko. It was the economy, and the midterms is a referendum on that. And I guess, to a great extent, that's and many other factors. That was the story.
I want to go back to this because I've heard this whole, it's the economy kind of line. But during Duterte's, the economy went up, his approvals are up. The economy goes down during pandemic, his approvals are even higher, right? Like there was even a joke that the worse the economy, the higher.
Yeah.
So we saw during Digong's time how messaging is important, including from the very guy on top.
Yeah.
I remember very well during pandemic, how Digong would always get a sympathetic response when he would say, grabe, hindi ko rin alam how to... like when you would show vulnerability, compassion. Kahit, alam mo, like Philippines is doing worst, literally, among all peers in the region. Economy is doing horrible. The death, COVID-related, are so high. But people would not blame the president or admin. In fact, Digong's support base even went higher during the election period. So, the pandemic period. So, in short, that made me skeptical about the argument that it's the issues per se, it's how they're perceived among audience, and also in terms of culpability, who to blame or should be blamed. Which goes back to the Marcos Jr. issue, right? Because the Lawag February speech was laying down the predicate that ito yung magiging line natin. We're not perfect, there's food. We're not gonna deny the facts. But what we can do is to say, a lot of these problems were inherited, right? A lot of these problems are not our fault. I mean, that's really the narrative game. And there are a lot of worse things that the other side did. So now the question is, how come hindi na follow up yan? So tama si Prof. Na very popular in candidates, but I'm not sure very competent in terms of messaging. How many of them really came out and really guns blazing to say, oh, let's talk about Farmal if you want.
True.
Oh, let's talk about Digong's record of economic growth.
Pro-China.
Exactly. Well, Tolentino did it towards the end, but it was too late, too little, right?
Yeah.
And not to mention he worked for Digong at some point, so some would even question the credibility gap.
Yeah.
But so that's why for me, the Digong moment really showed me that it's not the facts per se, but how you build narratives around it and pathos, right? So what went wrong there? Because BBM made the move. Do you think it's also because maybe these candidates felt BBM himself was not rallying the team? I mean, do you get what I'm saying? Because but the idea is that there's no center of gravity. That was the problem with the campaign.
Well, you're absolutely right, Richard. No? Several things. Number one, I agree with what Professor Ranjit said when he said that there was a lot of complacency in the running of the campaign, and we have it on good information from the ground that there were really problems with the way they coordinated things. No, minute details like talking to the people who are supposed to do the groundwork on election day. That was really poorly managed.
Basic,
so it was basic. It was campaign management 101 that was not really done properly. And I think going back to your question, those are major issues, but they were not able to weaponize it against the groups or candidates who were identified with the Dutertes. And on the other hand, the Duterte groups were able to consolidate of some sort perhaps because of the arrest of Digong and the looming impeachment. So several factors. And then you had the youth vote who came out strong for Bam and Kiko, and even progressive candidates like Heidi Mendoza. So several factors would explain that, but I agree with you. No, it was really, if we talk about a coherent narrative on the part of the administration, I couldn't think of any.
Yeah, actually,
it was they were neither here nor there. They did not, for example, on the impeachment alone. Are we in favor of the impeachment or not? So it's a mixed kind of messaging. They were also not able to clearly use to their advantage the issue on China. And there were a lot of surveys already showed that people were going to rally behind the Philippines in the China issue, but
no one took up the cudgels.
Exactly.
Except for Tolentino.
It was just too little, too late.
I forgot that one important factor that Prof was trying to say. The Digong incarceration, the timing of it, and you can see that in the surveys because after the Hague incident, survey numbers for PDP went up, not just single digit but double digit. Astronomical,
and all of them, the whole slate went
Jamie
up. Bondo,
and that
Philip
momentum,
Salvador,
that momentum
carried
most of the candidates forward, no? And to some extent may have also alienated some independents from voting for the way the messaging. You're right,
it's all over the place.
It's really all over the place, and maybe this is a lesson for observers and also the administration that messaging is so important. And the way they handled the messaging during the incarceration was really very bad, no?
It was all over the place.
And so putting all of that together may to some extent explain why they lost the midterms. But
But
that's not the loss. The loss is very
relative.
nominal. Nominal.
So which brings back to this basic point. I think we can agree that the administration underperformed.
Yes.
But to say that Duterte's won this race is a bit ridiculous because
Yes.
the Congress is still 283 folks
Oh my
voted
God,
for
oh.
Martin Romualdez.
Yes.
I mentioned a few mayors here and there, but
Yeah.
practically all of the mayors, even the ones who were not with the admin, they'll eventually try to play ball with the administration because you need to work with the national government. That's the
Yeah.
reality, right? I don't expect Nancy, Binay, or even Isko to be bastions of Duterte opposition or even opposition per se.
yeah.
I don't think so. So I think we can all agree that there was an underperformance.
Yes.
Probably complacency is the reason why, why should we even engage in attacks on other
yeah.
candidates? We're just going to be carried by the tide
Yes,
of the
yeah.
administration machinery.
Yeah.
But to say Duterte side won, right? It doesn't, that I found, especially when you have two other candidates like Bam and Kiko in
Yeah.
top 5, right? Winning, 35 million votes
but that
together?
goes to your basic point. Look at how the president responded after the midterm.
That
They
was my
basically
problem.
accepting that they will.
So he accepted the narrative,
The narrative
of the Duterte
of,
side.
yeah,
Exactly.
oh, yeah.
He operated from that narrative.
when
which,
he should not have done that.
Yeah.
Because that impression has stuck. And you see that impression even now resonating in the discussions about the
Yeah.
impeachment. No? That was a mistake. Because number one, they still are in power. Yes, at some level in most presidential systems, the second half of the term is really the lame duck
duck
legacy
period,
period. I mean, it's natural to have that. But to say that he's lame duck now is an overstatement. He's still in command. He's still the commander-in-chief. The House is dominated by his
Exactly.
cousin. And when you look at the local governments, they're all in line.
he has the backing of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, right? Exactly.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that backing gives us any confidence.
No, what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
if the accusation is the other side is backed by
Yeah,
China,
yeah.
but you're backed by the U.S., then the point is like, he has all the levers of
He
power.
lever,
Like, I don't
yes.
understand why should the president come out and essentially put out the white flag and say,
Yeah, sure.
reconciliation after
Because-
everything?
Yes, after everything, no? I mean,
That was
why?
a bit like too much.
I
Yeah.
think that also goes into our point earlier, the back and forth, the
Equivocation.
the narrative that
Yeah.
is so
Ambiguity,
unclear,
yeah.
here or there, no? In Tagalog, we call it malagihay. So Filipinos want resolve.
We have a
Yeah.
Ilocano term too for that, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that sends somehow mixed signals, so people are confused. And I agree with you when you say that, yes, the administration may have underperformed, but look at the people who were endorsed, for example, by Sara Duterte in Bohol. Only 2 of them won.
Yeah.
Out of all of those who have been...
Well, I thought no one won.
there were 2. There were 2.
Pero daming talo,
so,
di ba?
I mean, it may be
Yeah.
overblowing the
Yeah.
so-called Duterte
And
effect.
a
Amy
myth.
won because of Solid North. I
Yeah.
saw yung
Look at her
tarps.
bulk,
Yeah, sa tarps of BBM raising hands of Amy in Ilos. Like,
Yeah.
so...
In the end, Ilocanos voted for her.
Yeah, I think we have to call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
There were some sectors, there were some areas in the Philippines traditionally based on ethno-linguistic lines
Yeah.
that really supported the Dutertes, but to make a bold statement that the Dutertes one, I think would be, overgeneralizing too much.
Very inaccurate, but unfortunately, a lot of headlines, international media, I saw that. So I went and pushed back, like, show me the numbers. Like, 1,000 seats were up for grabs. We're looking at 12 seats.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, and this is a perfect segue to our
Yeah.
next topic, the Senate race was important precisely because as an existential issue was on the line,
Yes,
right?
that's it.
Will there be enough numbers to convict Sara Duterte? But as of now, in this month of June, it's no longer just a question of conviction. It's a question of whether the trial will happen to begin with. Now, again, there'll be a difference between the time this show comes up. But as of early June, Prof. Ranjit and Prophet, I want to ask you, did the race add any clarity on the impeachment question, or maybe it just made things a bit fuzzier, which is interesting because in a fuzzier situation, again, the levers of power are with the president, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
automatically tells you nothing is given. What not? Because like it's not like these were real political parties fight. These were
Yes.
all coalitions, fluid
Yes.
coalitions. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know where Camille Villar is going to vote. You get what I'm saying? Like, even within the Senate, the 12 incumbents who are going to carry to the next like, it's not clear where their loyalties. Like, maybe a few of them. I mean, it's clear the re-election is like Bato or Bongo, but there are a lot of other candidates. Like, for instance, listen to JV Ejercito. On one hand, it says, let's focus on important issues. On the other hand, it's saying, we also have a constitutional duty. So in short, it doesn't seem there was a decisive win for any side. We're still in a kind of a fuzzy, liquid
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the numbers, no, you'll see it's more a tie, no. Let's say let's be strict about 5-5, no, and then 2. But if you really think about it, do you think Bam and Kiko, with their liberal, moderate
Base.
politics, would be siding with the other side on any issue? Most importantly, the impeachment. So, from my point of view, medium to long term, the next 3 years, I think the president will have a stronger support in the Senate because actually of the inclusion of Bam and Kiko. You know, their moderate politics, their liberal politics will probably, as I keep saying, no, and Ronald, our friend Ronald was always, disagreeing with me on this, no. But I'll use this idea of Tiglao, that to a great extent, Marcos is really Noynoy Aquino version 2. Remember our conversation? That his politics is more aligned, there's more congruence, no? Between their politics and the politics of, let's say, Bam and Kiko. So my sense is, moving forward, there'll be more a tactical alliance between those.
Or there should be a alliance, perhaps, yeah?
There will be, and it's inevitable because their politics is very different from the other side.
Authoritarian populist.
Authoritarian populist model that, you see in the politics of Bato and all these other people. So, my sense is, what they could claim a victory in the sense that they got more people who are now less supportive of the impeachment in the Senate. So, they can claim that part as a victory. They can also claim a victory because the president's equivocation is not also good. Because, the president's sending mixed signals. Now, if there are allies or champions in the Senate who think of this as an issue of accountability, justice at its basic level, as an issue that, as a constitutional mandate to protect the people, not a political family, they're going to equivocate also because they don't know if the president's supporting their position. And maybe that's where all this, all this noise is coming from, this dynamic, because nobody's sure about how to move forward because, number one, it's an unpopular issue to their view. Number two, because 2028 is around the corner and they have to choose sides. And number three, that the president's not clear about what his position on impeachment is. Why will I stick my head out if the president's not going to stick his head out?
Exactly.
Di ba? I mean, why, and all this ambiguity is creating this kind of dynamic in the Senate, which I feel is unfair because, impeachment is a constitutional, the Senate trial is a constitutional mandate. Justice, accountability, these are not things that have a political color, no? These things are very clear, and Filipinos are coming out in the survey saying that, hey, when it comes to this, we're clear. She has to face the Senate trial to clear her name.
Can we talk about that survey? Because it looks like 3 different surveys kind of track with it. WRNM, where SWS, and OCTA, all of you are showing that at least 8, if not more, clear majority, super majority, I would say, of the Filipinos are not saying dapat ma-convict or ma-impeach.
No, nobody's talking about that.
They're just saying that at least have a trial, which is the constitutional duty of the Senate.
Yes.
So actually now even the Senate as an institution is on trial.
Yes,
right?
That's
because
what Senator Cayetano
it's
is saying.
constitutional duties now.
The fact that these discussions are being circulated shows that there's a thought balloon being pushed around. Can we decide to not have the trial for technical reasons? The fact of the matter is, in our survey, which has come out, 78% of Filipinos want the Vice President to face the impeachment trial and to clear her name, to answer to the charges. That's 78. It's 8 out of 10.
Right.
There's not much gray area there. Alam mo yun? So,
Ilan ba
that's
yung
consistent
undecided?
to
Ilan ba yung undecided?
13 lang or 13% against, and then the few others
So
left.
only
less than 10.
1 out of 10 basically against it.
Yes, basically. And then the awareness is at 91%.
So that's
of the
universal.
91%, 78% of that 91% are saying she should face the impeachment trial and clear her name. So, I mean, that's your public basically saying, number one, they want accountability. Number two, they want her to clear her name, to use the opportunity to clear her name. Number three is they want the trial to go on. Obviously, they could have said no. to the question.
They could
And so-
say, this whole thing is a witch hunt.
Yes,
They didn't say that.
they didn't say that.
Which is the argument of some side, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as we speak, Senator Bato confirmed. Again, some would say maybe he's trying to take the punch for the team, but
Yeah.
he said it's from him that there's a resolution. Apparently, there could be more than one saying na huwag na tayo dismiss then, which is something constitutionally questionable, right? What is your read of that?
I think, Richard, what we seem to be missing in our analysis of the situation is that there are really, and I'm still, I may sound too optimistic
Sure.
about this, but there are still some senators who are really expecting to look at the evidence, which speaks to the greater majority of the people.
Sure.
So as of now, they may have their own leanings, whether they're in favor of conviction or acquittal, but that still depends on the gravity of the evidence that would be presented to
And
them.
gravity of response of the public once the evidence comes out, right?
Certainly,
Yeah.
because they know that history is going to judge them
Right.
kindly or otherwise if their vote is going to be opposite of what is expected of them. Especially if, for example, if the evidence is too overwhelming and yet you vote to acquit, then that's going to be problematic. The reverse is also true.
Yeah.
If the evidence is a dud and then you
Yes.
vote to convict, then that's also going to be problematic. So I don't know where the question on whether to proceed or not to proceed is coming from. It's not even supposed to be a partisan issue.
Yes.
Tell me, who's against the conduct of the impeachment? Not the Vice President.
Yes.
Because she did
She
say
said
that
bloodbath.
she
She's
wanted
confident. Let's go.
Exactly. And some are saying that if indeed she proceeds with the impeachment and comes out not guilty, it's going to make her stronger. So
Yeah.
what are we...
So can't this actually backfire? The fact that some of our key allies like Bato de la Rosa, Senate,
True.
are even preventing the trial. So the joke is, people remember, Bato de la Rosa back in the day when there was Tokang and all of that was saying na kung wala ka naman ginawang mali, wala ka dapat ikakatakot sa batas. And the people will say, well, if she's not guilty, why should she fear a trial?
Yeah.
So some are saying, maybe she's guilty. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure this is gonna help them politically. Because legally, it's gonna be a numbers game. How
Yeah.
many will vote?
Yeah.
Will she get 9 or not out of 24?
And
But
in a
pol-
sense,
Yeah.
at least in their calculation, I think they have the numbers. That's
Yeah.
how confident they are. Now,
They only need 9, remember?
Yeah, you only need 9.
So they're overdoing it, maybe?
Yeah, maybe there's the
Or perhaps they don't want to run the risk
yes
of having all the
exposing.
evidence exposed.
She
Yeah.
could get too politically damaged,
Yeah.
even if she legally...
Yeah, but if
Even
you're sure...
politically she gets out of it. You're right.
Still,
Yeah. If you're really sure about your numbers, what's the problem?
Yeah.
Look at what happened to Trump.
maybe there is a problem there.
Maybe that's where the problem. I'm sure they're measuring the public sentiment.
Right.
But it's pretty clear now. You have 3 surveys basically saying that we should have
Want
a impeachment trial. She should be held accountable. She should, be able to answer the charges
Right.
against her so that she can clear her name. So there's a public support for this trial, and I don't think there's any there's any gray area as far as that's
Yeah,
concerned.
equivocation.
So, yeah. So
And let's
that's
be clear,
clear.
last time we saw a nosedive in Sara Duterte's number was when the Quadcom hearing happened.
Yeah.
This could be even more blockbuster because we're talking about Senate. Imagine Robin with Padilla in the robe. I mean, look at De Lima in the prosecution. Like, it has all the
but
pieces
that's-
of...
yeah, it's
Right?
like
You know,
a drama, no?
If you are a producer,
Yeah,
like, this
that's
is the ultimate content,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
But at the risk of... Oh, actually, we already took the risk. Just to push back against people, we're not reducing this to a kind of a popularity show,
Yeah.
a content show, which is where I want to end this discussion on a kind of a more forward-looking note.
Yeah.
This is not the first time we're potentially facing an impeachment, right?
Yeah.
You had the situation of Erap Estrada, whereby when it was precisely when the SEAL people were trying to protect Estrada from even a proper scrutiny, that's where nagkaroon ng backlash.
Edsa Dos, yeah.
And yet many people were still argue that, and then what happened after Edsa Dos? Kay Corona, right? The impeachment finally happened. But it was also, some would say, politically damaging to the Aquino administration, the way it happened. I used to work in Congress during that time. I remember internally people were saying, why are they doing this to this guy, right? And eventually Corona came out as a sympathetic figure to a lot of people, right? I know a lot of people who became hardcore Duterte supporters, including lawyers, legal minds, because they felt garapalin na nangyari. So, in short, this is my really final question, which is very important. What are the lessons we learned from previous impeachments that we should take into consideration now? Ano yung baby, ano yung bathwater? Because
Yeah.
we want to come out of this impeachment trial a better democracy,
Yeah.
no matter where it goes.
Again, looking at history, I mean, accountability and justice are important to the everyday Filipino citizen. And when they feel that that's being trampled upon, they go out in the streets, they protest. No? There's a misconception that this is a done deal. Yeah, as I agree with everything that you're saying. The opportunity is a double-edged sword. No? It's if she's exonerated, which I think politically she will be, because of the numbers that she
could
has
go Trump.
in this Congress and in the next, more so in the next. Okay, but again, it's double-edged because the more accountability, the more clarity, the more information that comes out about the supposed wrongdoings, the more people will take a stronger position. And Filipinos, look up to justice. They look up to accountability. They don't like people who appear to be good but are not talaga. So I know I'm being simplistic here, but the fact of the matter is, this is now an important issue for everyday Filipinos if they have an opinion about it. In our survey, 78% want her to face the impeachment trial to clear her name. So that's the objective. Now she has to clear her name. It cannot be just seen as a political an outcome of a political maneuver.
Yeah.
She has to come out,
Or brazen impunity.
Yeah, brazen impunity. Yeah, because Filipinos don't like that, and the surveys are already showing that. So my fearless forecast, it's gonna happen. The impeachment trial will push through it. At least it will start.
And carried over to the next
That's our hope. I think it will be carried over. Yeah.
And then I think that perfectly goes back to where we started in this episode, right? Which is, if there's one thing na nakita natin sa election, it can create surprises, good surprises. Meaning, voters, especially probably younger voters, we don't have the exit polls, but this is the sense we get. No,
Yeah.
probably we'll have more focus group discussion. Is that if they see may garapala na nangyari, if they see that the system is too broken, they will go for something that is better, or at least an alternative, right? And that's where high stakes itong impeachment trial na to.
Most certainly, we have to go back to the ERP impeachment trial. Remember that what triggered EDSA was really, as you mentioned, the second envelope, which turned out to be a dud. It was a perception. It was perception more than anything else. And my own sense is that Filipinos really want to know information. They want to get access to information. And if you withhold that from them, they don't like it.
Yeah.
So it may be perhaps enough for them to go to the streets and demand for accountability on the part of government. And on the other hand, you also, as you mentioned, in the case of Chief Justice Corona, who's eventually he was exonerated. He was able to get back all his retirement pay, etc., etc. So people are closely watching this. And if you exclude the people from the equation, you just hide it under the rug, then that's going to be problematic for us now, and it's going to be problematic
Another people power, you think? Or a mini people power?
A political price will be paid.
And most certainly, it's not going to help us in terms of our advancement as a democracy.
And political stability. I mean, if the argument of President Marcos is that, we need reconciliation for national development, if the argument of some of the senators is that we want to focus on gut issues and all, well, if sobrang garapalan, if there's brazen impunity, you're inviting more political polarization and instability, right? So getting this one is right. And my sense from what you're saying is that you neither can do the kind of railroading perception of what happened with Corona, nor can you really block people's access to accountability-related information, right? So, in short, it's not only about whether the trial happens. They also have to make sure it's a legit trial, not a Mickey Mouse trial, right?
Yeah.
This is also what's important. That's why the role of the Senate is very
And
important.
that can only happen if you allow the trial to proceed in the first place. The Constitution is very clear to proceed with the trial. Whether eventually they get to dismiss the charges, they get to pronounce a not guilty decision for her, so be it. But let's go through the process and do it fairly without undue delay and influence.
On that note, thank you very much, Prof. Ranjit and Dean Ed, on that very forward-looking and interesting discussion. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify and YouTube. I'm Richard Heidaria, and that was The View from Manila, where One News, all sides, all the time.